Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to 15 Minutes with Lori. I do have a few items that I want to share before we get into our discussion this morning. The first one, on Friday, Randy Marie with Maris was kind enough to meet with us in the morning to go over some of the updates that have been shown. I do have the recording. I did send it out, but I will send it out again just in case it got missed or lost in your email. So we understand you get a lot of them. But one question came up about the supplements in Maris, and they confirmed with Brad, the IT there at Maris, that the supplements will drop off after 1 year. So within a year after it's closed or expired or whatever it is, canceled, those supplements will drop off after a year. And then also, I want to mention that we have Katie Helms. She came to our office meeting last week. It was absolutely wonderful. She's going to do a training session. I had sent out recently that it was going to be June the 24th. Wasn't thinking about that date because that is one of our sales meetings. So we are going to bump that back to June 17th. So on June 17th, we will be having a LinkedIn training here at the Big Bend office at 10 o'clock. And then at 10 o'clock this morning, I have my Leader's Edge training. And unfortunately, I cannot pass along that link because it's a paid session. So if anybody wants to join me at 10, they're welcome to do so. I'm sorry, at 11 today. At 11 today, they are welcome to do so. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen here. We are going to talk today about not just the final walkthrough notice, but what happens when a seller doesn't make the agreed upon repairs, or if there's some type of damage to a wall or something that's just not quite right during that final walkthrough. Every buyer has the right, of course, to bring in the inspector who initiated the report for the issue that was found. So in that inspector can come back for a smaller fee during the final walkthrough and make sure that whatever that item was that was repaired by the seller or a general contractor, make sure that it is done correctly. Okay, it's important that your buyers know that is recommended, because if I show you here in the contract during access and final walkthrough, the line, let's see, it is, well, let me just go ahead and read it. Seller agrees to permit inspections of the property by inspectors, contractors, termite inspectors, surveyors, engineers, and appraisers selected by buyer as provided for in the contract, or inspections required by buyer's lender or insurer upon reasonable advance notice to seller. Buyer and selling broker, okay, so buyer and selling broker, that's the buyer's agent, may also be present during this inspection. Seller grants buyer, selling broker, and any inspector whose report prompted a request for repairs. So that's the line that I want to point out to you. So the inspector whose report prompted the request for repairs, the right to enter and walk through the property, and the right to have the utilities transferred to buyer within 4 days prior to closing. The purpose of the walkthrough is only for the buyer to confirm that the property is in the same condition, ordinary wear and tear is acceptable, as it was on the date of this contract, and that repairs are completed in a workmanlike manner. Seller will arrange at seller's expense to have all utilities turned on during the period specified for any inspection and walkthrough unless utilities have been transferred to buyer. Waiver of property and improvement inspections does not waive the right to a walkthrough prior to closing. So we've talked about why any buyer whatsoever has the right to do a final walkthrough, whether it's commercial, whether it's multifamily, whether it's vacant land, okay? Believe it or not, there could be stuff on that vacant land that is a problem. And then of course, a home that they are purchasing. So they all have the right to do that. Now, If repairs are not completed, obviously the final walkthrough notice needs to be filled out, and we need to come to some type of a resolution. But if you notice on the walkthrough notice, it doesn't give buyer or seller an out, okay? So the final walkthrough notice does not give buyer or seller an out. So at the very bottom, on line 29, it says buyer rejects seller's proposal and submits an attached counter proposal. So you can use a new final walkthrough notice because there isn't like a counter final walkthrough notice or anything like that, okay?
Yeah.
So make sure that you understand that this notice does not give the buyer an out. I want to go back to the residential sale contract because line 340 and 341 are extremely important, where it says the closing does not relieve seller or seller's obligation to complete improvements and repairs required by this contract. So what does that mean? What does it mean if the seller does not make the repairs and they're closing in a day or two or even less? Obviously, you need to come to terms with the seller on how they're going to fix the items that they already agreed upon and when they're going to be done by. Buyer has options, okay? The first option, I do not recommend, but it is an option for them. They can close, and that statement in there states that the seller still has, an obligation to make the repairs. I would put a deadline on it. I would always put a deadline on it. If seller after closing does not make the repairs, what's the buyer's rights here? Well, they can seek legal advice, of course. They could take them to small claims court and possibly get some money out of it to make the repairs themselves. But that's always something that we don't want our buyers to have to deal with, right? So the best option is to move the closing. Now, I know a lot of people say, oh my gosh, the buyer doesn't want to move closing, the seller doesn't want to move closing. Well, the seller hasn't made the repairs that they have already agreed upon. So they have to understand that, buyer wants them done. So they all need to make arrangements. The buyer, if let's say they're moving out of a rental or they sold their other house and they have to be out, ask them, what are your options here? Can you find a place to stay for a period of time while the seller, makes these repairs, and then we would close later? I think it's important to always have those discussions with any buyer, regardless if we think it's going to close or not, because we all know that when you sit at the closing table, sometimes things can fall apart. So always make sure that the buyer understands that, they need to try to find a place to go if they have to move out and they haven't closed yet, okay? Can they move in with a friend? Can they move in with does a friend have a rental unit that is not being leased out for now? Can they stay there a couple weeks, So it's always important that they understand what their options are, okay? So the buyer does have options in that case. Does anybody have any questions about the final walkthrough, the notice, what happens if the seller hasn't made repairs and things like that? Any questions at all?
Not a question, but I have a comment. Just if the buyer were to choose to close and try and get the seller to do it after the fact, I've never had that happen, so I don't know for sure, but playing devil's advocate, I can see an argument where, well, you closed, even though we didn't do it, you closed, and the seller could say it's resolved. So if they're planning to go that route, they should definitely talk to an attorney to make sure that they're protected, because I could see a seller saying, I'm done.
Yep. Because sometimes the sellers are packed up and halfway across the nation, or halfway across the state or whatever it might be. And that has happened. So, making sure that they have done the repairs before closing is always the best option. So thank you, Mark. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments about it?
Lori, I have a question, please.
Yes.
So I have found that some of the repairs that need to take place, when we do the final walkthrough, I'm not an expert to find out to confirm that the repairs have been done properly. Mm-hmm. How do you suggest to handle that? I mean, it could be something with the furnace or electrical that I'm just not an expert in.
No, you're right. And you know, our code of ethics basically state we are not that expert. So we've got to be careful when we see that there's something that's a problem and how it needs to be repaired. But I will say, and like I said earlier, the buyer has the right to bring that inspector back in for a small fee to look at those items to make sure that they were done appropriately. Yeah. And you know, obviously, if it was done by, let's say, a licensed plumber, licensed electrician, a reputable roofer, a reputable contractor, make sure that you get the receipts, paid receipts, lien waivers, and any warranties for the work that has been done. Because if something happens after closing, the seller's not going to take care of anything. That the buyer needs to make sure that they have the contacts for the people who did it to make sure that they come back and do it right. So I hope that answers your question, Sparkle.
It did kind of. I've been actually putting, recently I've been putting in my inspection notices that the seller is to supply all documentation, waivers, and warranties that come with their repairs.
Yes, absolutely. And that's very, very important. Good. Thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments? Mark, is there anything else you'd like to share this morning?
No. As far as I know, if for the agents in Big Bend, I think I'll be back there Wednesday, trying to get a couple things. So I won't be there the next 2 days, but I'll be down there Wednesday.
Okay. But still, commission checks will be processed. So no sweat, everybody. Okay. I just want to make sure everybody knew that. So in closing today, got about 2 minutes, but in closing, I want to share, whoops, wrong thing here. That was a review. Wonderful. Here we go. Okay. In closing today. So this came across my desk this morning. So start today. What could you start today that might make history? Could you take one step towards your biggest goal, then repeat it tomorrow and the next day and the next? How many days in a row could you call a past client? What would happen if you mailed one handwritten note every single day? Where might you be in a year from now if you chose consistency over complexity? I'm giving you 1 minute back in your day, everybody. Have a great one, and we will see you very soon. And I will have another 15 minutes with Lori on Wednesday. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for joining.